Well, hello there, humans, hippies, earthlings, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and whoever you're lucky enough to be doing it too. I'm Bushka on Blitz, and it is great to be back amongst the humans in Australia, where I can settle down and get to my old man ways with my regular scheduled programming. And today we're going to be looking at the BULLDOG that is a little bit Bavarian. This is the M41, but the German variant. And it's a tier 8 light tank. Straight away, you know I'm going to like that because it's a tier 8 light. And there are various things about it that I do really like. And there are actually some things about it that I wasn't that impressed with. I'm going to talk to you about why I think it is a fairly good tank, what I think's wrong with it, the equipment that I run on the tank, and some of the things that I feel you absolutely have to do to be good with this thing. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time. Now, first and foremost, don't forget this is a premium tank, and there was a deal going when you bought this where you could get it with a whole bunch of equipment already locked and loaded, which is pretty impressive because spare parts are hard enough to come by. And despite the fact that we believe there are going to be a lot of updates to spare parts, how they work and keeping them, it still struggles. Now, that's one of the things I think it struggles with there. The gun can be very trollish. I've even got a vertical stabilizer mounted on this thing here, and it still occasionally just comes out with the most odd and random shots. I don't know, I can't explain it any other way than it's just trollish, and it's not trollish in the traditional sense of the word where it goes all the way over the map. It just has a lot of near misses. Now, I played about 40 games in the thing, did very well, had nearly 70% win rate. I couldn't get it to churn out damage like I was able to do with the RU251, and that was a little bit of a surprise because the RU is very, very good for me at just consistently pumping out good numbers. And while I played this in a very, very similar fashion, it was a little bit different in its return on investment. And I don't know whether that's because at the present time, there are a lot of light tanks in the game, especially a lot of light tanks like this, or that people are out hunting light tanks like this because of the event. But there you go. Well, by event, I mean the sales of these things. Let's have a look at the equipment. The big key here for me that you should be running is the calibrated shells. Calibrated shells in the current iteration of the game are exceptionally strong when you're driving a light tank that has so much invested in the penetration of its heat and HE shells. The big differentiating factor for the M41 90mm is that it's got a high explosive plastic shell. Now, you can get a good dose of damage coming out of your HEP shells, which is more or less the German light tank variant of Hesh, which you see on the British tanks. You can get 112mm a pen running the calibrated shells on this for your HE, and 275 on your heat. Now, why is that so cool? It's because that piece of equipment now gives you a huge benefit, plus 5% for AP and APCR, but plus 10% to the penetration values of heat and high explosive. And I was actually talking to the devs in Minsk, and they were saying they may have to look at those numbers again because it does seem to be doing very, very well for heat rounds. And that's important because penetrating with the heat shells and the HE shells on this tank is really where the DPM is won and lost. If you have to use heat, you're obviously taking a lower damage shell, and if you have to use HEP or high explosive plastic, you're able to fire a shell that does 320 alpha damage, and that's very, very nice on a light tank. Now, I mentioned the RU251 in conjunction with this tank because, gee, they are very, very similar. They both run tanks that use high explosive plastic. And the reason I'm showing you this clip here is because you will see me hit a whole heap of shots with HEP, and you're going to see just how valuable that is. You can see, there we go, 300 alpha into that one. And the RU251 has the same basic variant. It's got a HEP as well, shell, but it has it on a faster firing gun, which is pretty odd because they're both 90mm guns. But this one, the 90/76mm US cannon, has for some reason got a faster rate of fire, a slower rate of fire and a bigger alpha damage, which is kind of odd. So the RU251 can get 12.28 rounds per minute out, running all the rations and the bells and whistles with your gun rammer. The M4190 can get that out to, well, if you run gun rammer, you can get it out to 10.63, but realistically, both of them should be running the calibrated shells. They both have that large HE round. You can see here the gun's pretty decent for cross-map shots and everything. Once you let the reticle go in, it's more about those on-the-move shots, I guess, that I found it was a little bit lacking in smack and stamina. But for all that, it's not terrible. And if I'm nitpicking at it and saying that that's the bad part of it, then it's not that bad. I prefer the faster rate of fire on the RU251, in fact. But what I really prefer on the RU251 is the fact that it has 10 degrees of gun depression. The M41 has 8 degrees. Now, that's a nice number, but it's not 10 degrees, which is a much nicer number. It's 25% more gun depression, which is a fair bloody chunk. It is very, very good at flexing. You can see here, I'm going to show you a couple of clips. It really does well. I've moved right around the battlefield, spotted a weakness, and I'm going to take advantage of that by pushing right up here and getting side shots into this Tiger 2 and eventually coming up and getting some free damage into the sides of other tanks. And that's very traditionally a light move. The other thing that's nice about running the calibrated shells and the heat is that with that extra 10% of penetration value, you really can deal with heavy tanks a lot more effectively. It's nice to have that 191mm of pen on your AP, but having 275mm of pen on your heat is pretty sweet. It really is. It's very, very effective. And it would be remiss of me not to point out that the hidden stats for the M41 are pretty sweet in terms of terrain resistance. And that's one of the reasons why I find it to be very, very good mobility-wise and able to flex quite efficiently. Now, you saw me move around the battlefield here on the last map. What I'm going to show you on this map is how you can quite often, because your acceleration is so good and your terrain resistance stats are so good, you can quite often really push to the edge of the envelope, even when you're under a lot of pressure to move back. You can see for some reason one of our mediums went down here. They've got 5 mediums and lights, and they're all up top, and there's only 3 of us here now, so we're very, very much under the gun. I mean, there was certainly nothing wrong with that on-the-move shot for that tank. And what that allows you to do is to play to the edge of the envelope in terms of mobility. So what I'm going to do is push here, try and get some shots in, support as much as possible. You can see I put myself in the lower side of the hill here, so when I need to run, I am as close as possible to the area where I need to run to, namely the town and where my heavies and everything are. And that's because the terrain resistance stats are great. Now, the terrain resistance stats, basically the lower the number on your terrain resistance stats, the better you are. This has a fantastic set of terrain resistance. The RU251 is excellent. It has 0.8, 0.9, and 1.3. Now, that is soft, medium, and hard, or hard, medium, and soft, rather. And remember, the lower the better. Very, very few tanks in the game have under 1 for a terrain resistance stat on any particular type of terrain. The M41 has 0.6, 0.7, and 1.2. So it is gloriously mobile and quick on the acceleration. You can see there, I was able to successfully move away from what was a really bad engagement, get towards a good engagement, ended up doing nearly 3,000 damage and live to tell the tale. This is even more obvious as to how tough this is. Yeah, the RU is 0.8, 0.9, and 1.3. This also has a lot more bang for buck in terms of horsepower per ton, or no, effective horsepower per ton, which is the coefficient combined with terrain resistance stats, all that kind of thing. It's 39.6 on hard terrain as opposed to 34.3 for the RU, 33.9 and 19.8. They're very, very good numbers. The RU only really beats this tank on soft, squishy, muddy terrain. So bear that in mind, well worth knowing. So effectively, very, very good tank for relocating, for flexing, for getting out of trouble. And I mean, I got out of trouble there. We ended up winning that game pretty convincingly, actually. It's able to farm damage up with nice, high explosive pen. It's able to move very effectively. It's got good gun depression. The thing it doesn't have, obviously, is any armor whatsoever, because it is a light tank. And I like light tanks to have no bloody armor, because that really feels to me what a light tank's role should be on the battlefield. It's lightly armoured, it moves around very, very quickly. Unless you're a T-54 lightweight, which I did actually have a little bit of a discussion with the developers and say, I love this tank. It's my favourite tank in Tier 8, really. Well, it's at least in the grand final. But why does it have such amazing stats, and yet tanks like the AMX 1390 weighs this like half the amount and moves slower, kind of thing? So you never know. They may be looking at balance in Tier 8 at one point, and they may touch the T-54 lightweight. And if they do, you certainly can blame me. Because I had a good 5 minutes explaining, you're going on about historical accuracy, and then you have a tank that's got better armour than a 1390, weighs a lot more, yet moves quicker, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Here you go. There's a cruel twist about to get cruel twisted. We go to the HE plastic round, and you're going to see again, that's something I use a lot. 355. That's like rolling a standard round from a 105mm gun. Like, that's a nice round to be able to hit with every once in a while. It's a high roll, admittedly, but it's not a hugely high roll. It's only 30 over the average alpha of that gun, so it's not like you've gone crazy. Your view range is very good on this too, 290 meters. So you're capable of spotting tanks at a great distance and doing the damage to them, which is great. Look, to be very, very simplistic about it, and this is being overly simplistic, it's like an RU-251, but different. So a little bit higher alpha on your gun, a little bit slower rate of fire. So your DPM is under an RU-251's, but not terrifically under. It's like 200 hit points per minute, damage lower. So not massive, but you can kind of note it. Might be one of the reasons why I still prefer the RU-251 to this. Your mobility is every bit as good as the RU-251's, albeit you don't have the top end speed, but your acceleration is excellent and your terrain resistance stats are excellent. And you can see even at 240 meters, I'm able to comfortably move forward and get shots off on that SU-152 without being spotted. So that just goes to show you how good the camouflage on this tank is. Your view range slightly inferior to the RU, and your gun depression 2 degrees off from the RU. But for all that, great tank, and it earns money. I forgot to mention that. That's obviously a huge, huge part of why the tank's going to be popular. And a lot of people are going to buy this tank because they really enjoy driving light tanks, and they want to play at Tier 8 with their mates or with their friends in IS-6s or something, and it gives them an opportunity to drive a light tank at Tier 8 and still earn cash, which that is where it is head and shoulders above the RU-251. It does all the kind of cool things the RU-251 does, but it does them without costing you an arm and a leg. For me, credits are not so important, obviously. For me, spare parts are the main currency, but I believe that Wargaming is going to look at some big changes towards spare parts. They talked about having premium tanks that actually earn more spare parts than standard tanks, which I think would be a definite benefit to owning a premium now that credits don't really seem to be the big key. And for a lot of guys who have huge amounts of games in tanks, credits are not the big issue. It is really all about spare parts. But that's not happened yet, and there's no telling if that ever will happen, or if it is going to happen if it's not a long, long way down the line. What I can effectively tell you is that this tank does the job. It is more than competitive. It is a good tank at Tier 8, and it will earn you money into the bargain. So now that we've got all the bells and whistles out of the way, let's actually have a look at one final game, and I'll have a chat to you just purely and simply through the gameplay about what's going on. There we go. We did a bit of farming in that game. It wasn't particularly special. Now, the reason I chose this game to show you is I really like this as a light tank game. This is very, very straightforward. I'm running with my good amigo, the Snake Eyes. He's in the IS-3 Defender. And so this is the kind of situation you'd expect to see this tank in a lot. You're playing with your mates. They are running a heavy tank, premium tank, farming credits. And you've just had enough of running your Lerva or your T-34 or your IS-3 Defender or your IS-5 or your IS-2SH, or your T-34 Independence or any of those big, slow, heavy tanks that are renowned as premiums at this tier, or even like the Super Pershing, and you want to drive something that's not like a medium tank like the 54 Mod 1. you want to drive something really, really quick, and that's where you'd switch to your M41. Now you can see it's quite funny that LTTB pushes on me. I switch up to HE, get 316 into the back of the RU, and they've been very aggressive, but thankfully my team came up here with me, and I've got 3 mediums behind me, which meant those guys did not stick around for a handshake and a sandwich, and I was able to then push straight on down to the other side here, which is pretty cool. I like this about light tanks. I like to be able to play a very flexible role on the battlefield. I am still the tip of the spear over the A-cap here. I am looking at positions, and I can see that Snake is getting pushed on. So what I'm going to do here is kind of ignore the 2 guys that are behind the A-cap, and I'm going to go and look to help my platoon mate. Now, Snake Eyes is in a fairly strong position. He is in an IS-3 defender. He's more or less hull down. There is an RU-251 pushing around on him. And look at this little beauty go, by the way. The acceleration is excellent. And the handling on the tank itself is bloody lovely as well. You've got nearly 70 degrees of traverse on the tank when you've got it upgraded. I don't run the traverse mod. I run the acceleration mod, even though it's been dropped down to 5% instead of the 10% extra you get on traverse. I feel that it's really, really important for this tank to be as quick as possible. At 70 degrees of traverse with all the bells and whistles, that is still incredibly good. You know, that is still very, very good. It won't be the inability to go around someone that gives you any trouble. It's going to be the inability to flex and get away from a situation. And you can see Snake and I then go and clean up. And that's a really, really straightforward game, hey. But that's what I like about light tanks. That's why I like playing light tanks. I got a platoon mate who is the Anvil. I turned out to be the Hammer. Went all the way around, then I get around this Tiger P. And as I was saying, the traverse is not the issue. Like, I am really going wide there. There's no need to go wide. And I'm able to go a lot shallower if I wanted to. But it's not necessary. Having that extra bit of alpha, in fact, I'd probably... I prefer the RU-251, but that might just be recency bias. The fact that the last 20 or 30 games I've had an RU have been pretty spectacular, and it's very, very hard to beat that kind of feeling. I think the fact that this is premium and allows me to farm credits would probably put it over the top if I'm looking just for pure quality of life and playability. So there you go. It's a good penning, high damage, HE round, premium light tank, tier 8. It's very, very hard not to like that. Probably should buy it, I'd say. Until next time, I'm Bushka on Blitz. Look after yourselves and stay safe on the battlefield.